Hello, friends. Robert Pepin here, author of the Caverns and Creatures series of comedy, fantasy novels, and short stories. With me is Sam West, and today we'll be talking about the spell Stinking Cloud. Ew. All right, you're gonna have
Ironically, dispersed by a very strong fart.
to some wind. We'll talk about that. That's something I want to ask about. But there's a lot in this spell I need to wrap my head around with, and that's
Okay.
why you're here to help me.
Great.
So first,
Happy to be
before
here.
we start that, what does Stinking Cloud do?
Okay, Stinking Cloud is a 3rd level spell. This is the cloud kill of 3rd level, I guess. I don't know. It's a concentration spell with a duration of 1 minute, 90-foot cast range, 20-foot area radius. So like it makes a big old sphere of gas.
Mm-hmm.
It takes rotten egg or several skunk cabbage leaves to cast. Have that on hand. In any
Yum.
case, you create a 20-foot sphere of 20-foot radius sphere of this yellow gas. It spreads around corners into areas and the area is heavily obscured. That in and of itself can be useful. It's like a 3rd level fog cloud right on our base. Each creature that's completely within the cloud makes a con save at this whenever it starts its turn in the area. On a failed save, it spends its action retching and reeling. And then it says creatures that don't need to breathe or are immune to poison automatically succeed the save. A moderate wind of at least 10 miles per hour disperses it after 4 rounds. A strong wind disperses it after 1 round, 20 miles an hour or higher. This spell seems... I've DM'd a very long time. I have never once cast this spell on monsters that have had it, because I'm like, oh, that is probably not that good. I'm not going to read that. And then I've never had a player cast this on any of the creatures that I've run, any encounters I've done before. I've never seen this spell cast. And I could not tell you why. This spell seems gross. I can't, like, I've read this spell a handful of times in my life. And every time, now in particular, I'm just like, this seems really good.
Gross, sure. Fun, sure. But here's my first issue. Retching and reeling isn't a condition.
Correct.
All right, so I guess it means they can't take an action. They can they move?
They still can move.
Well,
They just spend their action retching and reeling.
Does it say action?
It does. The creature spends its action that turn retching and reeling.
Oh. All right, so retching and reeling.
Additionally, again, it's heavily obscured for what that's worth, which means they're functionally blind as well, which is nifty. And there's no save blind cloud, basically, if you want it. I think so. Let me sell you on it. You're going against 7 creatures, big old number of them, right?
Yeah.
Eating 7 actions, or even 4 to 5 actions for a single 3rd level spell slot is exceptional. This can very easily do that. You just throw down a Stinking Cloud on a bunch of enemies, all their actions are gone.
Mm-hmm.
Take away an entire enemy team's turn for a 3rd level spell slot can be really good. That is all it needs to do for me to be like, I'm happy I cast Stinking Cloud. A bunch of creatures didn't act in a single round.
I mean, they do get to make a saving throw. Yes.
And again, a group of 7 or 8 creatures, 5-ish of them probably are failing, 4 to 5, low end 3. You're normally getting, you don't ever really want to cast this on 2 or 3 creatures. This is going to hit groups only. And on groups, it debilitates them. I have a hunch why no one ever casts this, because Fireball is the same level, and it doesn't just debilitate, it murders them. Most times whenever you're dealing with large groups of creatures, they are low HP.
That does debilitate them.
Yeah. Honestly, that's probably why I have never cast a spell, nor have I seen anyone cast a spell, because despite it being a powerful effect, death is a more powerful effect. And this doesn't kill them, but it does debilitate them. That makes its use cases more fringe, especially because it hits the same area at lower range than Fireball does. So this might be another spell that just doesn't see any casting realistically because Fireball exists, which is a bummer. But if you are wanting to play it even has the problem where like you can't fire into the area because it becomes heavily obscured. So this is a spell that supplements other casters. You can. I guess things are often going to run out of this, so then they're into easy shooting gallery for your ranged friends or whatever. That's going to be neat. If they run towards the front line, your front line gets free swings at them after they waste their actions. There could be some neat use cases for this with a heavy martial group. If you want to highlight other people's strengths and just debilitate enemies with your spell slots, I think, despite the effect seeming very powerful, I think I've convinced myself, walked all the way around to being like, yeah, I get why this isn't cast.
You were just trying to sell me, were you?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I sold myself the other direction. I talked myself out of it.
Um, yeah, it's something. I don't know. Maybe if it was a second level spell or something, but
Yeah, I agree. Then I'm real into it. Then I'm like, oh, this is a real spell. Third level just competes with 2 pricey options, I guess.
Yeah, there's a whole lot going on third level.
Yeah. I think even like fear is definitely going to be better than this in just the steer instance that it forces them to do things that they don't want to do, that is eating their actions, right? When everything they're spending their turns running away from you, outside of shooting back at you, which a lot of them aren't going to be able to do anyway, fear is going to have a more realistic or more applicable use case. You're going to be finding more situations where you don't just want to debilitate, but you want them to scatter, you want them to get away from you, you're looking for defensive options. It's even good against 1 or 2 creatures. You really don't want to cast Stinging Cloud against 1 or 2 creatures. This is a bad saber die if it's only against 1 or 2 creatures. You have way better options than that. Like, 1 Hideous Laughter is going to be way better than Stinging Cloud against the majority of creatures if they're in single instances. Plus, there's a good amount of creatures that don't breathe. There's a good amount of creatures that don't care about poison. This is useless in those situations as well.
I got it.
Go for it.
The fireball issue we had before. People got hostages. Stinking Cloud them. You know,
the hostages aren't taking any damage.
Retch and reel, that's fine.
Yep.
Then yeah. Then everybody throw up all over each other, and 4 rounds later you're in the same situation. But maybe they'll get away.
Well, it opens up the situation, right? So like, if they can't spend their actions killing the hostages at minimum, right? Which means your paladin can be like, great, hold my breath, run into the Stinking Cloud, kill some baddies.
We can't hold his breath. I mean, if you could hold your breath to avoid it, then everybody would be doing that.
Yeah, that's a good point. It doesn't specify you can hold your breath. It just says that if you don't need to breathe. So your Warforged paladin runs in there and saves the day, right? Or even it can even be the kind of thing where like you drop the Stinking Cloud after the enemy's turns so that they didn't have time to ready actions to then go deal with them, right? There can be some scenarios where that specific circumstance works out for you. This is one of the spells where the heavily obscured condition probably is a net even, where it's not like super useful, but it's also not actively destructive, just because it'll kind of just grind an encounter to a halt because everything in the area is blinded and you can't see anything in the area.
Well, I think that's most of the time with the heavily obscured condition.
Yeah. And this isn't something that's asking you strictly to retreat. If you're going to retreat, you're just going to cast like Sleet Storm or something. For a spell that I gave a lot of shit, I reference Sleet Storm a lot. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe it's just really good and I don't give it enough credit. Maybe the internet is right. Nah, that can't be right. Anyway, Stinking Cloud is in that category of like, yeah, this is something like, okay, disable the enemies, run backwards. They just leave it on their turn after retching your reeling. You deny them a dash. That doesn't seem amazing. So this isn't really something you want to do while retreating. This is something you want to do to eat actions in a competitive environment, like in a competitive fighting for your life kind of fight.
Yeah.
Again, it's just, you could be doing 86 damage instead.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of sold myself with the hostage situation, which is not going to happen all that often. But, yeah, every now and again, that'd be a fun way to deal with it.
I wholeheartedly agree. I'm a big proponent of having more dynamic encounters. Hostage situation is a great example of that, of an encounter where you can't just blow them up because they've got things that you can't throw damage at. It's a way to challenge casters in particular in a way that you need marshals to handle, right? Stinking Cloud can't fit the bill there. Is Stinking Cloud better than like a hypnotic pattern? Probably not. Is it better than sleep? Probably not. Is it better than...
Whoa. Better than sleep. Sleep has a finite amount that it can handle. I mean,
98 worth of hit points is a lot of hit points. So how many hostages we talking now?
Well, I mean, you're talking enemies as well.
I know, but I'm saying is like, assuming hostages are like peasants, they're looking at 1 to 3 hit points each, so it's not costing you a whole lot of the sleep, and then the enemies are falling asleep alongside them, and then you're getting free execute and stuff. I think that Stinking Cloud, in the niche uses where it is better than fireballing, there are probably effects that are better than that. There are probably cheaper options you have to navigate those encounters, I would suspect. I came in really loving this, being like, this spell kind of is awesome. No, I get it. Never mind. This is middlingly useful. If it were second level, I'd be all about it. It's just in too competitive of a slot, I think.
Nah, well, I mean, in the hostage situation, I don't care if there are better options. This is the one I'm using.
Sure, absolutely.
Like, even if it's, my own kids that are hostages, I'll
Mhm.
make them throw up, and we'll laugh about it later.
Sure.
Ah, what the one other thing I want to talk about is the wind thing, and they make it doubly annoying this time. All right, a 10 mile per hour wind can it'll disperse the cloud after 4 rounds. All right, that's fine.
Literally never
That's,
matters.
and then 20 mile per hour wind after 1 wind is entirely dependent. I mean, unless you're casting spells that cause wind, it's entirely dependent on the DM. It's like, if the DM says, oh, suddenly there's wind, your cloud's gone, then
That's kind of a dick move.
the whole table knows you weren't rolling randomly for wind. You just ruined my spell because you wanted to.
So yeah, that's I think a perfect example of like hostile DMing is a term I like to consider.
Yeah.
It's the adversarial DM, right? The one that's like, screw this guy in particular in this moment. This spell's over. I think this is
like you with somebody casting Thunderwave.
I listen, I talked great. I had great things to say about Thunderwave in niche circumstances, and I stand by everything in that video. Despite, oh god, I will defend my Thunderwave stance. In any case, in the case of like Stinking Cloud, to do it right, to say like which this should never happen. If you're ever at a table where you're like, oh my god, Stinking Cloud is ruining all of my encounters, which how?
Yeah, that happened.
But if that is the case, you can, it's kind of a counterbalance to be like, all right, you're in a stormy environment. Stinking Cloud isn't going to work here, or it's not going to work more than a single round here. In all honesty,
it wasn't stormy 5 minutes ago.
It's the kind of thing that you preface an encounter with to say this is an encounter that is not supposed to include Stinking Cloud, much like you would include hostages to say this is an encounter where you're not supposed to fireball them. Now, you'll have some wizards be like, fuck the hostages, fireball them anyway. But you'll find instances where like it's supposed to be a counterbalance. I think it's also supposed to be like a logic in your brain to be like, oh, it makes sense that a cloud gets dispersed by gusts of wind. That didn't really need to be there. This is something that can be like, you can figure it out logically. I think that you didn't need that text, and the text is only. I think the text is going to end up leading to more of those adversarial moments that it's going to end up leading to people be like, this is a helpful counterbalance to Stinking Cloud.
Well, I think if the text would have said, it can be dispersed by a gust of wind spell or something to that effect, fine, but not. It can be dispersed at the DM's discretion.
Mm-hmm. It's not ideal. I mean, most things can be mitigated at the DM's discretion. Most things just don't say that. And the fact that it says this again, it feels much like one of those times there's going to be like, I feel personally slighted because my DM was like, I decided that your spell doesn't get to work right now. And those mechanics probably, I don't know, they need to be presented in a very careful way, and this way feels very haphazard. The first bit about 4 rounds, though, that doesn't matter. I promise you that will never literally matter. Encounters rarely will go longer than 4 rounds. And things won't be in the Stinking Cloud for more than 4 rounds. Things won't be in the Stinking Cloud for more than a round.
Yeah. It stinks in there.
That does.
Anything else you got to say?
Maybe use it to get people to move specific spaces, I guess, to get it out of the Stinking Cloud. But like,
yeah, it could be. I mean, there are better ways to do that, but
yeah. I mean, maybe you like in a world where you got a 7th or a cleric with 7th level spell slots, you put them in the Stinking Cloud and then put the blade barrier behind them that they don't hear for some reason, and then they don't see it because it's heavily obscured and run into it. Nah, we're really stretching to try and make the spell good.
Oh man, we could use that for major image though.
You could.
You make a wall, a illusory wall with an illusory tunnel entrance, and then there's a blade barrier right behind it
that they can't hear for some reason.
You
don't hear the grinding of metal.
All right. Hey, we're not talking about
listen, that. I every time you think about major image, be like, oh, that's such a cool use for it. Remember that, because that spell slaps. This one doesn't as much.
All right. Well, you've sold me.
Yeah, I know. We went backwards here. I was like, it eats so many actions. It doesn't meaningfully eat the actions, I guess, and it's not consistent. This spell is hard to use. I think in its best case scenario, the spell's a 3, and that it will be worth it to disable a bunch of actions. I think the only reason that it's never getting cast is because Fireball exists, and other 3rd level spells just have a higher impact than this. which leaves it in this really awkward spot of the things you'd want to put in a stinking cloud aren't ever going to realistically be there because you'd rather just fireball them because they're going to be lots of small things, and against larger things you have better save dice against larger things. So that leaves this in a spell that doesn't need to exist kind of category that probably is, you'll probably be fine if you're ever like, oh, I want to try this out. You'll probably get some success with it. It's not going to revolutionize the game or anything.
I'm going to give it a 4, an optimistic 4. And listeners, I want you to justify that in the comments. All right, everyone, that was Stinking Cloud. Thank you, Sam, and thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. If you found this helpful, informative, or entertaining, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button below. You needn't smash it. A gentle tap will suffice. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel. And make sure you check out the links in the description, where you'll find my Caverns and Creatures series of comedy fantasy novels, Sam's full review of the spell, and other fun things.